Two different Nintendo focused stories we are covering today, first of which having to do with a nice detailed 8-minute look at a game that we saw featured at the most recent Nintendo Direct, which was of course a partner showcase, but we are now getting a deeper dive into the gameplay and the look of Epic Mickey Rebrushed, which will be headed to the Nintendo Switch later this year in 2024. Then story number 2 has to do with the ongoing evolving relationship between Nintendo and Microsoft, and specifically a game that has been released on PS5 that actually may determine Microsoft's broader decision on just how many games they may end up bringing to PS5 and Nintendo Switch/Switch 2 in the future. So we're going to get on the same page with all of the implications and details. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first hop over to the Epic Mickey Rebrushed 8-minute gameplay trailer that I will have the entire thing linked in the description down below. I personally am pretty excited for this game to hit later on this year. We still don't have an exact release date. I've seen some speculation online that it's more of a fall season type of game, maybe even bridging into that October-November timeframe. Who knows, it might be out way earlier than that, but we just got the 2024 tagline at the end of the original trailer that we saw, and GameSpot got some hands-on gameplay, so it makes you wonder if we might see a lot more coverage of this game in upcoming weeks and months. But you did get a nice look at what it looks like, and it looks like the original game, but definitely brushed up in terms of the visuals. Obviously, the game already looked really solid at its core, and it just needed a fresh coat of paint, no pun intended. And I will say that I have some nostalgia for this game, but just the right amount to make me want to play it, but also not to where I remember all of the details of it, because I played through it once and never went back to it. So seeing this early gameplay footage that GameSpot put up did make me remember some of the puzzle solving slash platforming in a 3D environment, as well as a 2D environment with some action elements. You're also going to have, sequences where you're fighting off waves of enemies with your magic brush, and you're going to have to look at platforms and figure out what to do and where to shoot to actually get them to start spinning to get up to the top. And there's some really cool 2D sections of gameplay where you're literally traversing it, kind of like a throwback SNES era Mickey style game. So Mickey Mouse games, surprisingly enough, have been really solid over the years, in my opinion. They've never been up to the level of anything like a Sonic or Mario for me personally, but super enjoyable for the most part. And I'm glad to see this game looks as good as it does on the Nintendo Switch. All of the footage you're seeing on screen and this GameStop preview was on the Nintendo Switch version, so you don't have to worry about it being any more visually downgraded than what it is, and it looks as good as it needs to look to me. So I'm personally excited for this one. I'll definitely be keeping my eyes and ears open to when we get a solid release date so I can pre-order this one and pick it up, and we may make a video on it here on the channel. Let me know in the comments down below if you have nostalgia for the original Epic Mickey back on the Wii, or if this is something that you might be getting into for the first time, or is it a game that really doesn't interest you and you might wait for a sale down the line or just skip over it altogether. Now, story number 2 we're talking about today has to do with the prospect of a large portion of Microsoft's first-party content potentially headed multi-platform, meaning PlayStation 5 and even Nintendo Switch/Switch 2. We know that Microsoft is in a very different mindset nowadays, as they've acquired Activision Blizzard. They're a massive game studio publisher at this point. They literally own more game studios than just about anybody else in the industry right now, and they have a ton of IPs under their umbrella that are very valuable to them. And the big question mark for Microsoft for a long time is, when they made all these acquisitions, would they lock everything behind Game Pass and just decide that you can only play these games on Xbox hardware, or would they go the route of, yeah, you might want to play on Xbox hardware for Game Pass, but you can actually play a wide variety of all of our games on multiple consoles, because Microsoft, at the end of the day, in terms of their broader business focus outside of Xbox, has largely been a software focused company, and maybe that's where they would decide to make their revenue, is just on the software front and not so much the hardware front anymore. Well, there's reports that Microsoft's cooking up something huge with their next gen consoles, so they're not getting out of the console market by any stretch of the imagination, but they may choose to port a large portion of their first party IP over to Sony and Nintendo consoles, providing they perform well enough. And you probably remember at the Xbox Business Update podcast that we saw from them that they mentioned 4 titles in particular that are getting this treatment: Pentiment, Grounded, Sea of Thieves, and Hi-Fi Rush. Now, unfortunately, the Nintendo Switch as of currently only has Pentiment and Grounded. We may see Sea of Thieves and Hi-Fi Rush in the future, but I'm willing to bet if those come over at all, they will be Nintendo Switch 2 games just due to their more complicated visual fidelity. I think you could get Hi-Fi Rush to run on the Switch, but it might not be as smooth of a process, or it might take more work than what Microsoft wanted to put into it. So we got the more simple games out of those 4, and it was very clear from Microsoft that their big first-party IP at this point in time may not be going multi-platform, but they also made in the same interview the statement that really no games off the table in terms of maybe going multi-platform one day if it makes business sense. So kind of conflicting messaging around, and not to mention you see other interviews and things, and Phil Spencer says, yeah, we're exploring the opportunity of putting our games on other consoles. And it seems like, according to some reports, that it now looks like we may have the one game that could somewhat sway Microsoft's decision on just how many games they may choose to go multi-platform based off of its sales performance, and that is none other than Sea of Thieves. This is a rare game, funnily enough, and it's one of Microsoft's big popular live service games that continues to get updates and evolves over time, and there's some interesting statements being made around this game's performance and whether or not we're going to get anything else in terms of first-party Microsoft support on other consoles. As you can see, the following article posted up over on Go Nintendo, which reads, rumor Microsoft's future ports for Sony/Nintendo may rest on Sea of Thieves performance. Testing the waters. Microsoft recently announced that they were bringing some of their games to both Switch and PlayStation 5. Switch owners get Pentiment and Grounded, while PS5 players can enjoy Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves as well. In particular, it seems like Microsoft is paying extra close attention to how Sea of Thieves does in the PlayStation ecosystem. The Verge has talked to various unnamed sources familiar with Microsoft's plan, and they all pointed to Sea of Thieves being a key test going forward. Microsoft wants to see just how big of a splash Sea of Thieves can make on PS5, and depending on the response from consumers, future Xbox releases on both PS5 and Switch could come about. It's a bit disappointing to know that Microsoft will decide some Switch ports based on how well a game not coming to Switch does, but that's apparently the case. All we can do is hope that PS5 owners give Sea of Thieves a warm welcome, as it could pave the way for big name Xbox games on Switch and Switch's successor down the road. So out of the games that Microsoft chose to bring over, Sea of Thieves is probably the biggest name out there. Hi-Fi Rush had a lot of hype around it when it first launched. It's definitely died down now, other than the revival of the announcement of it coming to PS5, but I think that will be a game that PS5 owners might pick up that had their eye on a game that's that style, but it doesn't seem like the long-lasting sales juggernaut that you maybe can get a good read on the market and what the response to it is, whereas Sea of Thieves has a large active online community, and Microsoft is probably looking at how many of the live service game players that no doubt Sony is very successful with in their own right with their own releases will maybe entertain a game like Sea of Thieves. And if we're going to give up some exclusivity rights on our end, making Xbox maybe less attractive for certain gamers to pick up a dedicated console because they don't have a ton of exclusives anymore, since they're giving some of them out to other consoles, well, is the return on investment going to be worth it? And are we going to see enough user interest to really justify us losing exclusivity on some of our first party IP? I am hopeful that Sea of Thieves does well, and I'm hopeful Microsoft does go more of this play on any console you want type of route, because I would love to have a handful of first party Microsoft titles playable on the Switch, and especially the Switch's successor, when we see things supposedly closer to something in the realm of a PS4 Pro / Xbox Series S in power. You talk about some of the first party Game Pass games today that are available, also playable on Switch, I would be very hyped for. We already know we're getting things like Call of Duty. That's an illegal binding 10-year agreement for Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 to actually have content parity with the other consoles, so we don't have to worry about that particular franchise. But Diablo 4, Gears of War, Halo, Fable, Perfect Dark, amongst many others, Microsoft owns a ton of IPs now, you have to realize, and it would be really cool to see more support for a lot of those games, hopefully day and date, but they may indeed do a delayed release type of strategy where the first year or 6 months it's available exclusive on Xbox ecosystem of consoles, but then it's pushed out to PS5 and Switch or Switch 2 afterwards, kind of what Sony's doing with PC right now, where most of the first party games that come out on Sony will ultimately end up on PC, but maybe a year or two down the line, and they really give it a chance to sell through the big chunk of the units that it will to the console user base. But this is going to be an interesting one to see how it unfolds, because it seems like if these reports are true, a big portion of Microsoft's decision on whether or not they go full steam ahead with bringing a bunch of different games out for multi-platform, or if they go a little bit more the route of let's keep the big name stuff to ourselves, and maybe some of the smaller titles that don't perform as well on our consoles, we will port those over to the competitor consoles. So let me know what you make of all of this in the comments down below. And are you team Xbox going more multi-platform, or do you want to see them kind of make a comeback and lock it down exclusivity wise themselves, and also just come out with a powerhouse of a console? And maybe you think that's the direction that will actually ultimately make them more successful. But regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch the video on screen next if you haven't already. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.